You know that feeling when you open your bank app and instead of swiping out of it as fast as humanly possible, you actually pause. You read the number twice. And then you smile. Not because you're rich, not because you've made it, but because something clicked, something shifted. That feeling has a price tag, and it's probably not what you've been told. Every financial influencer with a podcast and a LinkedIn headshot will tell you the magic number is 1 million, or 6 figures, or some retirement calculator, spitting out a number so large it feels completely disconnected from your actual life. But here's the thing they keep glossing over. There's a much smaller milestone, one that most people never even hear about, that completely rewires how your brain operates around money. And once you cross it, the game genuinely changes. That number is $20,000. And no, this isn't just about having a bigger savings account balance. This is about something happening inside your head that makes every financial decision after this point fundamentally different from every decision you made before it. My name is Dave, and I spend way too much time thinking about money, financial psychology, and why some people seem to effortlessly build wealth while others keep running the same losing plays for decades. If you're someone who wants to understand the actual mechanics behind wealth building, not just motivational quotes slapped over stock photos, hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if it ends up changing how you see your money. Now before we get into the why, let me give you a clear answer to something the comments on every money video ask. Are we talking about $20,000 invested or $20,000 saved? Great question. And the honest answer is both matter, but for different reasons. $20,000 in a savings account or emergency fund gives you the psychological shift we're about to unpack. $20,000 in a brokerage or 401k starts the compounding math we'll get into. Both thresholds matter. Both change the game. We're covering both today. Here's the thing. Most people miss when they think about building wealth. They imagine it as a straight line. You save $1, you're $1 richer. You repeat until you're wealthy. Linear, predictable, kind of boring. But that's not how wealth actually works. Wealth has invisible thresholds, specific levels where the rules of the game change completely. And $20,000 is the first major one. The threshold that separates the people who will eventually build real financial security from the people who will spend their entire lives wondering where their money went. And the crazy part is, most people blow right past this threshold without ever understanding what just happened. Think about pushing a massive boulder up a steep hill. You're grinding, sweating, making painfully slow progress. Every inch feels like it costs you something. You start wondering if the whole thing is pointless. But here's what nobody tells you. There's a crest to that hill. And the moment your boulder reaches it, everything flips. Gravity switches sides. The same boulder that was crushing you starts moving on its own. $20,000 is that crest. Everything before it, you're fighting the hill. Everything after it, the hill starts working for you. But here's where it gets really interesting. And I promise this part is going to surprise you. The shift isn't purely mathematical. It's not just that you have more zeros on your statement. The real change happens in how your brain is wired to process every financial decision you encounter. When you have nothing saved, or close to nothing, your brain operates in what researchers call survival mode. Every financial choice passes through a filter made entirely of fear and scarcity. You take the first job offer that shows up, even if it's a terrible fit, because you can't afford to wait. You stay in situations you hate, because walking away feels financially catastrophic. You say yes to things that drain you because you need the paycheck. This isn't a character flaw. It's not laziness. It's your brain doing exactly what it was designed to do when resources are scarce. Protect you from immediate threats, even at the cost of long-term growth. Here's a real-world way to think about it. Trying to plan your financial future while you're broke is like trying to plan a vacation while your house is on fire. Your brain simply cannot allocate mental bandwidth to growth when it's consumed by survival. But something remarkable happens when you cross that $20,000 line. The noise quiets down, the fear stops dominating every decision, and your brain, finally freed from constant financial alarm mode, starts asking completely different questions. Instead of how do I survive until Friday, you start asking, how do I make this money grow? Instead of reacting to whatever financial emergency just showed up, you start thinking 3 moves ahead. Research from Vanguard found that having just $2,000 in emergency savings increases financial well-being by 21%. $2,000. Less than most people spend on a vacation they'll forget in 6 months. But that small buffer creates a massive psychological shift. Push that emergency fund to 3 to 6 months of expenses, which for most households lands somewhere around $20,000, and you pick up another 13% in financial well-being. More importantly, you've created enough breathing room for your brain to actually think about building wealth instead of just not losing it. Here's the math that will make this concrete. Let's say you're saving and investing $1,000 every month and earning an average 8% annual return. Getting to your first $20,000 takes roughly 19 months. A year and a half of discipline, of saying no to things, Of watching that account number crawl upward while everyone around you seems to be spending freely. It's genuinely hard, and here's why most people quit somewhere in that 19 months. It doesn't feel like it's working fast enough. But here's the kicker. Your second $20,000 only takes about 17 months. Not because you started saving more, not because you suddenly got a raise. Because your first $20,000 is now working alongside your contributions, generating its own returns. You did the exact same work, saved the same amount every month, took the same level of risk, and you shaved 2 full months off the timeline just because of scale. By the time you're building your third $20,000, the timeline shrinks again. Your money is doing a growing share of the heavy lifting while you maintain the same habits. And when the numbers get really large, let's say you've built $400,000 in investments, you're generating a fresh $20,000 roughly every 5 months. Automatically, without changing anything about your behavior. The same milestone that took you nearly 2 years to hit the first time is now appearing on a 5-month cycle. Think about that for a second. That first 20,000 felt impossible. Every milestone after it gets progressively easier. That's not motivation speak. That's compound interest doing exactly what it was designed to do. Now you might be thinking, okay, but wealthy people must have access to better investments, better funds. Some insider track the rest of us can't reach. And while there are some exclusive vehicles that open at higher net worth levels, that's not what's driving this. The real secret is almost frustratingly simple. It's just math working at larger scale. A 10% return on $1,000 is $100. Nice enough. Gets you a nice dinner. A 10% return on $20,000. Now you're talking about real money. Money that can fund a month of groceries, a car repair, or get reinvested to accelerate the whole machine further. Same investment, same time frame, same risk, completely different dollar impact. When you've got $20,000 sitting in an index fund earning 8% annually, which is a conservative estimate for a diversified stock market portfolio, that's $1,600 flowing into your account over the course of a year without you doing a single thing. Money you didn't trade your time for. Money that showed up because your existing money was on the clock while you were sleeping. There's actually, let me put it this way. The investment strategy available to someone with $20,000 is virtually identical to what's available to someone with $1,000. Same index funds. Same Vanguard or Fidelity brokerage. Same basic principles. The only real difference is scale. And that scale is what turns small percentage wins into real financial progress you can actually feel. Alright, real talk. What's your current savings number? Drop it in the comments. No judgment, no shame. I'm genuinely curious where people are at. But here's what most people completely miss, and it might be the most important point in this entire video. When you save $20,000, the money is almost secondary to what else you've built. Because getting to $20,000 from zero, without an inheritance, without a windfall, without moving back in with your parents for 3 years, requires something most people never fully develop. It requires the actual discipline of wealth. Stick with me here, because this is where it gets really practical. Think about what it took. You had to track where your money was going. You had to say no repeatedly to things you genuinely wanted. You had to resist the pull of every sale, every upgrade, every treat-yourself moment that your social circle was indulging. You had to keep going on the months where progress felt invisible. And you did this consistently. For months. Possibly for years. Here's the thing that matters. You proved something to yourself. You proved that you can control your money instead of letting it control you. You became the kind of person who can delay gratification when the stakes are real. That's not just a financial achievement, that's a fundamental identity shift that bleeds into every other decision you make going forward. Sound familiar? This is the part where most savings advice stops. They tell you to save, but they don't tell you what saving actually does to you as a person. Before $20,000, buying a $5 coffee might require a mental calculation. Can I justify this? After $20,000, you already know your priorities are in order. You don't sweat the coffee, you sweat the car payment. And here's another psychological shift that kicks in around this level that almost nobody talks about. You stop seeing every unexpected expense as a disaster and start seeing some of them as opportunities. When you're running on empty financially, a car repair isn't an inconvenience, it's a catastrophe that wrecks your entire month. A rent increase isn't motivation to negotiate, it's a crisis. Your laptop dying isn't a chance to upgrade, it's a gut punch. But when $20,000 is sitting in your corner, the car repair is annoying. The rent increase is a signal to have a conversation. The dead laptop is a chance to buy something better. You're operating from a completely different emotional baseline, and that baseline changes what you notice. Your friend mentions a small business opportunity and needs a partner. Before you'd think that sounds interesting and keep scrolling. Now you can actually run the numbers and decide. A distressed property pops up on Zillow, listed 20% below market value because it needs work. Before you scroll past it. Now you can ask yourself if it makes sense as an investment. Your company announces a conference in Seattle that could be career-defining, but they won't cover the cost. Before you make excuses. Now you do the math on the ROI and decide. This is what wealthy people mean when they say money attracts money. It's not a cosmic law. It's that having capital gives you options. And options are the currency of opportunity. Here's something else that happens around $20,000 that will probably flip your thinking on budgeting. You start caring less about small purchases and significantly more about large ones. And I know that sounds backwards. Hear me out. When you're financially squeezed, you obsess over every micro decision. Name brand versus generic cereal. Gas station coffee versus the place with the good stuff. Premium versus regular fuel for a car that doesn't require it. These decisions consume real mental energy because every dollar feels like the last one. But once you have a solid financial foundation, you realize these micro decisions are largely noise. The difference between making coffee at home versus buying it out every day is at most around $1,000 per year if you're really going overboard. That's not nothing, but it's also not going to determine whether you retire on time or work until you can't. What actually determines that? Where you live, what you drive, how aggressively you invest, how much of your income you convert into assets versus expenses. These decisions can swing your net worth by tens of thousands of dollars. So instead of agonizing over the organic produce aisle, you start thinking strategically about the choices that actually compound over time. This isn't about becoming a joyless penny pincher. It's about putting your mental energy where it actually has leverage. Now let's talk about what $20,000 does to your career. Because this is the part that most finance channels don't touch. And it might be the most directly impactful shift of all. When you're living paycheck to paycheck, you are functionally trapped in whatever job you currently have. Your manager could be making your life miserable. Your role could be a dead end. The company culture could be something you'd never choose if you had a real choice. But you can't leave, because the gap between this paycheck and the next is all that stands between you and not making rent. That puts you in a negotiating position so weak it's almost invisible. You can't ask for the raise you deserve. What if they say no and it gets awkward and you lose the job? You can't push back on unreasonable requests. You need this more than they need you. You can't explore other opportunities. You can't afford a gap in income long enough to do interviews properly. Here's what changes at $20,000. You now have what I call walking away money. You could walk out tomorrow and have months of runway to find something better. Now, I'm not saying burn everything down, but knowing you can changes how you carry yourself. It changes how you negotiate. It changes how you respond to being treated like you're replaceable. And here's the wild part. You often don't even have to use it. Just having the option shifts your entire demeanor. You show up differently. You speak up in meetings. You advocate for your own ideas. You stop performing desperation. And counterintuitively, that confidence tends to generate more income, more promotions, more interesting opportunities. The positive feedback loop starts running itself. But here's where most people blow the whole thing. And I see this constantly. They hit $20,000. They feel that shift. And then they spend it. Maybe they convince themselves they deserve a new car after all that discipline. Maybe they take an expensive vacation. Maybe they use it as a down payment on a house they're not quite ready for. Don't do that. That $20,000 is not a reward. It's not a trophy. It's a seed. And if you uproot the seed the moment it starts to sprout, you're starting over from zero, except now you've also learned that saving is possible, which makes blowing it feel extra painful. There's actually, let me put it this way, the average American over a 40-year period will spend somewhere between $400,000 and $500,000 just on transportation. Car payments, insurance, gas, maintenance, between $600 and $800 a month, every month for 4 decades. And simultaneously, a significant portion of those same people will tell you they can't find the money to build an emergency fund or fund their 401k. That's not a math problem. That's a priorities problem. The moment you drive a new car off the lot, it loses somewhere around 20% of its value. You haven't just spent money, you've actively destroyed it. Now compare that trajectory to putting the same dollars into a diversified index fund. One is a guaranteed loss from day one. The other is a historical average of 8 to 10% annual growth over decades. The car doesn't compound, your investments do. And I get it. Cars are emotional. They're tied to identity. They're how we signal success to ourselves and everyone else. There's nothing inherently wrong with wanting a nice car. But here's what $20,000 in savings does to that desire. You stop asking, can I afford the monthly payment? And you start asking, what is this actually costing me in terms of my future? That $35,000 car isn't $35,000. It's potentially $250,000 in your investment account over 20 years, if you'd let it compound instead. Suddenly the reliable used car doesn't feel like settling. It feels like a strategic choice. Here's the beautiful irony in all of this. The person making $700 a month in car payments is probably lying awake at 3 a.m. thinking about money. And the person driving the paid-off Honda with $40,000 in their brokerage account is sleeping just fine. Not because they're smarter, because they made one different decision at a critical moment. This mindset shift extends to everything: housing, vacations, subscriptions, hobbies. Everything gets filtered through the lens of opportunity cost. Not in a miserable, joyless way, but in a way that makes you intentional instead of reactive. And here's what surprises most people when they get there. You realize you don't actually want a lot of the stuff you thought you wanted. That bigger apartment? Maybe the extra $400 a month matters more than the extra bedroom. That expensive hobby? Maybe there's a version of the same joy that doesn't cost 3 times as much. This isn't deprivation. It's clarity. And clarity is what $20,000 buys you that no amount of motivational content can. Look, $20,000 isn't the finish line. It's not even the halfway point, but it is the first real threshold that changes the rules of the game you're playing. It's the difference between reacting to your finances and designing them, between survival mode and growth mode, between hoping things improve and building the specific habits that guarantee they do. The boulder is on the hill. The only question is whether you're going to keep pushing. Because once it crests, trust me, gravity becomes your best friend. Start building that foundation. Your future self is already waiting on the other side of that hill. If this changed how you think about your first $20,000, pass it along to someone still stuck in survival mode. They might need to hear this more than you did.